The Bravia 5 is Sony's latest and most affordable premium-ish mini LED TV, and this thing, it packs some pretty impressive specs. It's a 4K resolution, of course. It has 120Hz plus VRR, and the 65-inch variant I'm reviewing today does come with a mini LED panel with 384 zones. It comes with their XR processor. It does support HDR10, Dolby Vision, and HLG, and it comes in at a price of $1,299.99, and it also comes with a 1-year warranty, which is a little anemic, but hey, we live in a society, and there's a lot of things that make this TV awesome, but also bad. And the question is this an awesome TV for you, or is it a bad choice? Well, let's find out. I'm glad you asked. Now, real quick, if you haven't heard of me before, I'm the display guy and I review everything from monitors to TV to even VR. If that's interesting to you, please, for the love of God, subscribe. But in any case, let's move on to the review. So this thing was actually lent to me for review by Sony, so that's not gonna be changing any of my opinions. But let's start off with, what should you expect out of the Sony Bravia 5? Well, you should probably expect a somewhat similar experience to the more expensive Bravia 7 and Bravia 9, at least when it comes to the usability, but it is going to come with a little bit worse picture quality. Now, for a lot of people, that might not matter at all, but we'll get into whether it matters for you in just a moment. But yes, it does have a significant reduction in the dimming zones. So while this is going to be a huge step up over older LCD displays that don't have any local dimming at all, or maybe edge-lit dimming, and yeah, this is going to have a whole lot more contrast and depth to the image than that, well, it's not going to quite reach the heights of their flagship mini LED TVs, but enough. Let's get into the actual data itself, and let's start off with first the color. Now, by the way, if you are interested in buying this, I'll have affiliate links in the description below, of course. But in terms of the color, look, this is a pretty much regular mini LED display, so this is going to give you pretty decent color, especially for the vast majority of HDR content. It'll show it to you how the creators intended, as a lot of HDR content doesn't fill up the widest gamuts available today, and this panel will certainly do that for you. It will deliver vibrant, bright, and very good HDR imagery in most cases. However, to really get an idea of how capable it is, well, we're gonna have to take a look at the Portrait Display CalMAN results. By the way, I'm a part of their reviewer program. And so for those of you who are interested, let's jump into it. For everyone else, feel free to skip to the TLDR. And let's start off with the SDR performance. Now, out of the box, it is pretty decent. The tracking is fairly good. However, the RGB balance is a little bit off as it starts to get brighter. It isn't necessarily perfect as you get closer to black, and also does have some crushed shadows near the bottom of the curve as well. Now, you can improve it, and I will have the best settings linked in my Patreon in the description below. However, I couldn't necessarily perfectly fix it. That's to be expected. Now, taking a look at the actual color checker results in SDR, it was a little bit underwhelming when I compared to their more expensive options, as those did extremely well, and the Bravia 5, well, with an average delta E of 2.2, it's fairly mediocre, at least in SDR. Now, when we move on to HDR, it actually does surprisingly improve. The overall performance is pretty good. There's no major crush shadow detail, although there is a little bit near the bottom of the EOTF curve, and it does slightly overbrighten in a few areas, but as a whole, it's pretty solid out of the box. Also, the color checker does do better in HDR as well. I got an average delta E of just 2.83, which is very good for a display of this slightly more budget type. Also, in terms of the color gamut coverage, it does pretty decent, coming in at 74.09% in UV terms for BT 2020. So the TLDR, what is this thing like? Well, overall, I'd say it's pretty good, but there is a bit of crush shadow detail, especially in SDR. Also, in SDR, I did see mediocre color accuracy as a whole, and the HDR color coverage is certainly good enough for most content, but it is, once again, a little bit mediocre, but that's to be expected. Now, thankfully, HDR color accuracy is actually better than I was expecting, so that's great, and there was no major brightness / gamma tracking issues for the most part, so expect pretty good overall accuracy, especially in HDR, and that's what I've come to expect out of Sony. And while this isn't as good as their Bravia 7 or Bravia 9, I think for most people this will give you a satisfying experience, in terms of accuracy if that's what you're after. But maybe you're someone who's after maximum brightness and HDR impact, and does this TV deliver? Well, let's take a look. Now, if we zoom in here, you can see that the Sony Bravia 5 in the peak window brightness test at the D65 standard white point is unfortunately near the bottom of the pack. In fact, many OLED displays are vastly outclassing it, which is a little bit surprising considering this is a mini LED TV. And when we take a look at the Bravia 9, which is their flagship mini LED, it is far, far brighter than the Bravia 5. Now, in real HDR content like the game Baldur's Gate 3, we can see that this trend does actually unfortunately continue. In fact, this is really not too much brighter than the 42-inch LG C4, which I don't necessarily consider to be a super bright TV. However, that being said, I want to break this down a little bit deeper, as I don't want to dissuade you from purchasing this just because the brightness alone, because for movies, this might not matter. Now, the reason why I say that is because a lot of movies are actually graded at best up to 1000 nits, and so unless you're using some sort of dynamic tone mapping, which honestly I don't recommend you do for the most part, then this might not be too much of an issue. I mean, taking a look once again at those window brightness tests, you can see that it is doing over 600 nits in a 100% window, and the peak highlights are reaching basically up to 1000 nits, and that actually is significantly better than something like the TCL QM7K. And while the QM7K I felt like was just a little bit too dim to display some HDR content that's out there, I feel like the Bravia 5 will be able to display the vast majority, not just a good majority of HDR content with the brightness it can deliver. So what I'm telling you is basically, while it's not super impressive in the chart overall, I would mostly be concerned about brightness if you're getting into gaming. Console and PC gaming brightness matters a lot because it will scale very, very high in a lot of games, especially on PC where you can use tools to effectively infinitely scale it in a lot of cases. That's not the case with a lot of movies. A lot of movies, probably 1000 nits at best, and this thing, well, it can deliver that. So if you're looking for something to watch movies, the Bravia 5, sure, it's not the brightest, but it'll deliver what you need. So let's move on to contrast. And this is really where we separate the boys from the men, because contrast is the weakest part of most mini LED TVs. Is that the case for the Bravia 5? And here's what I'll tell you. Basically, my first impressions of this TV are that it's not like gonna blow your socks off. It certainly didn't for me, but it is a good step up, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, over older LCDs. It just doesn't quite reach the heights of the 7 and the 9, but that's to be expected. And I think for most people in this budget range, you'll be pretty happy with it. Now, if we take a look closer at the actual results, you'll see that, well, yes, it does come in far below the Bravia 9. Now, the Bravia 9 for me, getting upwards of nearly 19,000 to 1 for the contrast ratio, that's a pretty big jump over the roughly 10,000 to 1 that you're seeing on the Bravia 5. And really, there's only one other mini LED I've tested so far that does worse than this, but there's a lot of mini LEDs I haven't tested yet, and I think overall it's pretty decent. Now, of course, in comparison to OLED, it's a pretty night and day difference, but if you're not setting it right next to an OLED, I don't think it's going to be a huge deal breaker. However, in dark scenes, can it be an issue? And the answer is yes. Look, it only has 384 local dimming zones. At least that's what I counted on my 65-inch variant. If you get a larger TV variant of this, it'll have a lot more dimming zones potentially, and that will help the contrast substantially. But the 65-inch variant, 384 zones, I'll just tell you right now, that's not enough. They really need to be packing around 1000 in this thing to significantly enhance that contrast, and they're not doing it. So yes, it's an issue in dark scenes. I mean, take a look at some of this footage that I have here of fireworks going off, and look at the insane amount of blooming going on. Now, they have tuned it to try and make this less noticeable. However, what that means is a huge portion of the screen isn't actually displaying black, it's displaying some sort of gray instead. You just see a lot of blooming, and it can be a problem. So just be aware, this is a TV that will definitely be strong in a brighter room, and if you are gonna be in a dark theater room environment, you may wanna consider an OLED instead, which does have far, far greater contrast than any mini LED can deliver, or at least a more premium mini LED that helps mask that blooming more significantly than the Bravia 5 can. And speaking of putting in a bright room, how does it handle ambient light? This is an issue for QD-OLED especially, and it can be an issue for a lot of TV tech depending on how it's put together. And for this one, I will say overall it's actually pretty good. In fact, it does much better in a bright room than say QD-OLED monitors. However, it does fall behind glossy WOLEDs, which do slightly edge it out. But what I'm telling you is, no, you don't need to be putting curtains over your TV. This thing does handle the ambient light pretty well, and I don't think it'll be a problem for the vast majority of buyers. That's great. Now, as for using this as a gaming display, I know a lot of people will have questions about that because you're looking for an affordable TV and you have got to get your game on. Well, this thing actually surprised me. This is so far, at least right now, the fastest TV that I have tested coming from Sony. So Sony, great job on this one. This is a huge improvement over previous testing I've done. I'm gonna go ahead and actually retest now some of my older Sony TVs to see if there's been some sort of change or see if there's anything else that I can do in the menu to try and improve them further to see if I can match this result on the newer firmware on TVs like the Bravia 8 Mark II, because this is bizarre that I'm getting so much better latency results out of this versus, say, even their highest end OLED TV they're offering right now. This is a very good result coming in at 29 milliseconds, and this is right in the middle of the pack and at just 120 hertz. That's pretty good, and that's certainly good enough for console gaming, which is what I could recommend using this TV for. PC gaming, not so much. You'd want more than 120 hertz for the most part. However, there is one downside, and because it's mini LED and it's not using a super fast panel, well, the motion performance, it's not so good. There's a lot of trailing. It just does not look good in motion compared to an OLED. You compare this to the G5 next to it, and it is a night and day difference how much better that is. And in fact, the TCL QM7K, which is also a pretty affordable mini LED, is massively outclassing the Bravia 5 as well. So is this a good gaming TV overall? And I'd say probably not. It's okay. It's just motion performance not so great. However, it does have good motion handling options in the menu itself for watching movies. So this is definitely something that Sony does a pretty good job at, and they're one of the better ones on the market. Now, I still don't think it quite lives up to some of the hype that I've heard about Sony TVs, but if you do enable motion interpolation on a setting of 1, it gives you a pretty much issue-free experience with better motion, and that's something that a lot of TVs can struggle with. So Sony's doing a pretty good job here. Could it be better? Sure, but I think it's pretty dang good. It's one of the best ones out there, and for this being more budget-oriented, I think that's a pretty good result. Also, in terms of the low bitrate handling or like low resolution, that sort of stuff, I feel like Sony still has the best low quality SDR kind of like upscaling and fixing up of any TVs out there. Their processor and all their algorithms do a really great job, and you have a ton of options such as reality creation and other sharpness adjusting settings that really allow you to dial it in and massively improve some SDR lower quality content. And a lot of TVs can struggle with that, so Sony's also doing really, really great there. Now, for the text clarity and the subpixel layout, I think it's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's decent. So you got BGR or blue, green, red instead of red, green, blue. So it's got a few issues here and there, but for the most part, this is something, especially at a distance, you're not going to notice at all. Very clear overall. And also the finish itself is pretty decent as well. Now, it's a semi-glossy coating. It's not a full glossy coating, so you do lose a little bit of clarity. And for some people, that might be an issue, but as a whole, I think for a little bit more of a budget TV, I think that's perfectly fine. But I would like to see them move from semi-gloss to full gloss in the future. Also, viewing angles are kind of mid. You do lose some contrast and color off angle. It's not the best. Now, as for the sound, I feel like the timbre is decent. It's not amazing. Also, it has like decent or like acceptable treble, I'd say, in mids. But it does definitely lack bass, and this is certainly a big drop down from something like the Bravia 8 Mark II. The Bravia 8 Mark II, it was just amazing. This just isn't that. But the last thing they really, really nail, and Sony always nails this, is the user experience. I also really appreciate that they left the input button on the remote. My God, how many people have taken that off the remote? That is infuriating. So thank you, Sony, for not doing that. It sucks that it's not backlit. You gotta get on that. Fumbling around in the dark to try and figure out what you're pressing, that sucks. However, the user experience overall, I feel like, is really good. The menus are always responsive. There's not like a ton of bugs. It just works. And that's something that Sony nails, and some manufacturers can at times struggle with. So that's really like, when you're buying a Sony, you're just getting that good experience that is just always been good for me. That's been my experience. I love that. But what do I think about this TV overall? And like I mentioned at the beginning, it's awesome, but also bad. It kind of depends on what you want a TV for, whether or not this is awesome for you or a bad choice. So look, there's a lot to love with decent brightness, excellent upscaling, and really great low bitrate handling, decent clarity, and a flawless user experience. However, with mediocre brightness, contrast, and gaming performance coming at the same price as alternatives like the TCL QM7K, which boasts a more capable panel overall, I would urge buyers who do want to stay within the Sony ecosystem to move up to something like the Sony Bravia 7 if you want Sony's superior processing and rock solid "it just works" firmware, but you want a better picture quality than the Bravia 5 can give you. That said, you really can't beat Sony when it comes to actually using the TVs on a day-to-day basis, so if your budget is around $1,300, it's worth considering, and I'll have affiliate links in the description below. And with all that said, look, I'm gonna probably give this one a 5 out of 10 rating. I think for the price, it's all right, it's decent, and I think the picture quality is also decent, but it's nothing to write home about in terms of the quality or the value. I think Sony could do better in one or the other to move the needle more in their favor. So if you want to see other TVs that I think bring better value, check the description below, as I will have some other reviews that you might be interested in. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, RuPro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And now RuPro's offering a new detachable and upgradable pure fiber cable that sends the same 48 gigabits per second signal through its ultra thin and flexible housing, making it easier to route through walls. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out RuPro on Amazon today.